Good morning, everyone. My name is Deani Lee. I am here from Jamf. I am a professional services specialist. I do jump starts, so maybe I have talked to some of you at one point in time. But enough about me. You're here for the sessions. Today we have Microsoft and Jamf better together, and who better to say that than our representatives from Microsoft. So we have some program managers here for you. So welcome, please, without further ado, Neil and Arnaud.
Hi, everybody. I'm Neil, and this is...
Hello, everyone. I'm Arnaud.
We're here to talk to you a little bit about the integration work that we've done between Jamf and the Microsoft stack, so Intune and EMS. Talk a little bit about the value proposition of that. Why do you care, really? So if you're a Jamf user, you've got a big investment in Jamf. Why do you care about Microsoft at all? So we'll talk a little bit about that. I also wanted to say that I spent last week at Ignite talking about Mac, right? I'm the token Mac guy in our team. And so I spent last week in a bunch of Windows world talking about Mac, the odd guy out. And I'm here this week at a Jamf conference talking about Microsoft. So I'm kind of getting used to being the odd guy out at the moment. But
you're not alone.
No, you're here, yeah? You're here with me. So I've got a friend this week, so which is good. So this is the rough agenda that we were going to talk through. Why should you care about Microsoft? What's in it for you? We're going to cover a little bit of the ground that Brad touched on this morning. How many people saw Brad this morning? In at least 7, 8, 9, loads. So we're going to cover a little bit more of the detail of that. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how it works. So we're going to get into the bowels a little bit of kind of the plumbing of how Jamf and Intune integrates together. And then we're going to cover a little bit about some of the best practices that we've learned from deployments. And then Arnab's going to cover a little bit about some of the futures and those kinds of things around what we're building next. So why should you care about Microsoft? How many people in here today have already configured the Jamf connector to Intune? That's about 6 people. That's great. So, more hands are going up now. Yeah. So, ultimately, in Microsoft, what we have is a bunch of products. We are terrible at naming products and changing the names of products. So even we struggle internally in the names of what things are most days. So I thought I'd cover this slide deck, this particular slide, just to cover some of the naming and terminology. So Azure Active Directory, most people are aware of. This is the identity layer, right? This is a cloud identity platform and service. It can connect into Active Directory. So for most large enterprise customers, we have what would be legacy Active Directory in your on-premises data centers. We have a product called AD Connect, and that synchronizes your identities up into Azure Active Directory. Once those identities are there, we can use them to authenticate and access not just Microsoft apps, but quite a lot of SaaS apps as well. We've got Microsoft Endpoint Manager. This is what would have been Intune and Config Manager up until last week. And then we had a branding over the top of that now called Microsoft Endpoint Manager, which is because they're engineered by the same company, or the same engineering team. We've then got Microsoft Information Protection, which, anyone remember like AIP and RMS and those kinds of products? These are DLP products. Essentially, they're protecting data within the documents themselves. And then we've got Microsoft Cloud App Security, again providing information protection. This is where we're identifying the SaaS apps and the web services that your end users are using, perhaps not necessarily approved by IT, so kind of the shadow IT type stuff. And then we've got the Azure Advanced Threat Protection. So this is protecting the devices themselves. So I kind of wanted to cover that just so that as we start to use this terminology, many of you might not be super familiar with it, so I thought we would just cover this so that as we go through the rest of the session, it kind of makes a little bit more sense. For the rest of this session, we're predominantly interested in Azure Active Directory and Microsoft Endpoint Manager. You'll still hear us refer to it as Intune usually, although I don't know if the Brad's in here, but we will get used to calling it Microsoft Endpoint Manager, I'm sure. So with that, why do you care about what we're doing in Microsoft? Well, the big reason is that IT has changed. When I started in IT in kind of the early 90s, everything was within a single data center. Well, I could physically see pretty much every server and every bit of data that my organization had. We had 30,000 devices, 30,000 servers, and they were in one data center. I could go and see pretty much all of them. And that was pretty good, right? Because I could put firewalls around it, and I could then start putting protections in place to say, well, if you're not within my data, you're not within my corporate network, you're not accessing my data. So that's pretty good. It's pretty good security. But this has changed. And instead, what we're seeing now is both the devices and the data and services now living outside of those data centers. And that gives us a problem, because it means we can no longer protect our data just by limiting what's happening with a firewall. That gets really tricky. So what that means, and what we did, we changed our approach for security within Microsoft, is to move to a more identity-based tier and using something called conditional access as well. So the way this works and the way we control this is by using some of the data feeds that Brad talked about this morning. So we get telemetry from all over the world. We're getting it from Xbox. We're getting it from what would have been Hotmail and Outlook.com. We're getting it from a whole bunch of services, enterprise services and consumer services. And we're getting all these telemetry feeds into Microsoft about good sign-ins and bad sign-ins. So as an enterprise, you start to benefit from this because it means we start to see who the bad guys are before you do. We've probably seen that bad actor or that kind of attack somewhere else in the world, maybe against one of our consumer services, or maybe against another enterprise customer in another area of the world. So we start to combine and use all of that in this concept called conditional access. So what we can do here is we can start to take a look at the information we know about the connections coming into Office 365, and we can make decisions. So we could say, is it a privileged user trying to access the data? Are the credentials found in public? One of the things we do here is we actively go and buy stolen credentials on the dark web. So, when you read about, big breaches in, data that's been stolen from, large-scale networks, Sony's was stolen, and, there's a vast number of others. We actively go and buy that. So we go and buy that data, we process that data, and then what we do is we compare that against the credentials that we've got in Azure AD. So we can identify and tell you if one of your end users has registered in, perhaps they've used that email address and password in another service somewhere, and that password is the same as their current enterprise credentials. So we can start to raise that value and do things with it to say, hey, you've got a user, their credentials are up for sale and they're available in, on the dark web. So we can use that. Are they using a sensitive application? Are they on an unmanaged device, which is quite pertinent here, and we'll come and talk about how we do that later. But essentially, we can determine if we know that device. Have we got management control over that device or not, and what do we want to do in either case? Has it got malware on it? Is the IP part of a botnet? Do we want to even bother doing any kind of analysis of this request coming in, or do we just want to drop it? A possible travel scenario, so we're seeing where the requests are coming in from, and one of the things that we can do is we can say, hey, great, this user's just tried to connect in from Minneapolis, and then 5 minutes later they're trying to log in from London. You know, that's probably unlikely. So we can start to think that's a little bit strange. Anonymous clients, so things like Tor browsers. This is one of the easy ways we test this. When we're setting this stuff up, flicking in and out of the Tor browser is a really good way to test what's going on. So we've got those, and then we can do a whole bunch of things with that. So we can decide if we're going to allow access. So let's say it's all good. You know, all of the requests coming in are good. We know the user, it's managed. We've not got lost credentials. You know, it's a managed device. Everything looks pretty good. We're going to allow access to that. Let's say we see something here that just looks a little bit odd, right? We've not seen a request from that user from that country before. So we're not sure. May be good, may not be good. We could perhaps require MFA, right? We could say to them, you know, we're not quite sure whether this request from you is good or bad, so we're going to hit you with an MFA request. Whereas if they come and connect in from their corporate head office, we may choose not to. We can do forced password reset here as well. So let's say the credentials, we know that they've been stolen and they're up for sale on the dark web. Rather than blocking their access, we can just ask them to reset the password. We can deny the access, or we can limit access. We can control what they can and can't have access to. So this is a bit of an example about some of the ways that we think about this. So you can see here we know information about the user. So we know their role, their group, their client. We know a bunch of information about them, when they last signed in. And then there's a bunch of other things we know about this user. So you can see here the config is anonymous, and they were last seen in Asia. So we're going to see a couple of different things here. We're going to see that they're anonymous IP. So is it common for your users to log into Office 365 via a Tor browser? Right? Is that common in your enterprise or not? Is that common in the world or not even? And what we're seeing here is that we probably think that's an outlier. It's an unusual scenario, so we perhaps want to do something with that. And then unfamiliar sign-in location. So in here, we can take some access, and we can block the access over the Tor browser, and we can force the password reset as well. So in summary, why do you care? Well, you care because that Microsoft controlled that boundary into the Office 365 data and the Azure identity. So if you're using Azure AD, and you're using that to access your SaaS apps, or you're using it for Office 365, we control that conditional access boundary around that data, okay? And many of these controls need information about the device itself. Now that's great if we manage it, right? So if Microsoft manage that device, that's brilliant because we know all about it. We know the information about, you know, the device itself, where it came from, all of the different bits of information about that device, and we can start to use that conditional access. If it's managed in Jamf, we can't see it. And that's where the partnership comes in. The partnership here comes in by us having that relationship with Jamf and being able to get a feed of the devices that you've got managed in Jamf. So what does that give you? Well, it gives you this brilliant better together story where you benefit from all of the stuff that I have just mentioned, all of the really cool things that we have in Microsoft Azure Active Directory conditional access. You benefit from all of that risk stuff. You benefit from, you know, us going off and buying stolen credentials. You benefit from all of those controls and sign-in risk and all of that stuff. But importantly, you also benefit from the investment that you've got in Jamf. We're not going to change anything that you do with Jamf today. You benefit. You keep that as it is. And Arnab is going to talk in a moment about how that all works together. But ultimately, we benefit because we get the rich feed from Jamf, and your investment in Jamf, so all your devices and all that device management stays exactly where it is today, and that doesn't change. You continue to manage your devices in the same way that you do today, but you can then configure and benefit from the Microsoft conditional access rules. Does that make sense to people? I can see people nodding a little bit. Is anyone confused? And stand up and make somebody look silly? Kind of no, yeah, ready. But that's really the value prop essentially. So it's the conditional access and Jamf. It's a together story, and it's not. There's no compete here really from us. It's yeah, we work with our customers. We don't really mind whether they are Jamf customers, not Jamf customers. You know, we're totally agnostic when we work with customers, specifically around Mac. So with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Anib.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Neil, for explaining to us really well. It was also a good refresher for me. Why conditional access is so great. So before I get into the how, let me give you a little bit of history. So I think Jamf used to be Casper back when we started the discussion of having Mac management in Intune. So when we started talking about the plan to have a Mac management capabilities within Intune, we went and talked to our customers who already had Macs within their organization. And to our surprise, we saw that, well, we weren't surprised that 9 out of 10 customers were already using Jamf, but they loved it. They were fans of Jamf, as you all are. And that eventually led to our decision to not build something from the ground up within Intune, but leverage the capabilities and the legacy and the fans that Jamf already had built up over the years. And the other way of looking at it is we know that Microsoft has great expertise in the enterprise industry, and we know how costly it is to make even the smallest change within your organization, within your IT. So what you get with conditional access is just an additional layer of protection over the existing investment that you have already made. The end user flow does not change. The admin flow pretty much remains the same. And you're getting another layer of protection, as Neil talked about, using conditional access. And not only that, you also get the additional data set that our data centers are crunching the numbers, and really it's happening at a scale that you couldn't have predicted or known just within your organization. So that really makes for a very powerful story. And Brad talked about the great partnership we have with Jamf. And I'm from the engineering team. I really believe that our great engineering in this partnership really reflects the valuable partnership we have with Jamf. And as an IT admin in an organization where you have both EMS and Jamf, you not only get the deep Mac management capabilities that Jamf provides, you also get the powerful compliance capabilities that comes with conditional access within Intune. And now with the new Microsoft Endpoint Manager admin experience that we have built, you not only get the Jamf devices that are visible within that admin console, but also your fleet of other devices belonging to other platforms. So you get a single pane of glass experience when you're using Jamf with EMS. And as for the device compliance, Neil talked already about that a bit. For the EMS and Jamf integration piece, device compliance policies can be defined by IT, and they're evaluated based on device health signals, such as the system integrity protection that macOS provides, device properties, such as min-max OS version that IT can define, and also system security pieces, such as password complexity rules, device encryption, firewall, and gatekeeper.
I think, I'm going to add a little bit here. As we were talking to customers last week about this integration and about the way we deal with Mac compliance. And a question here, for those that are currently using the Intune and Jamf connector for conditional access, how many people are feeling the need for more compliance values, so more attributes to go and decide on what compliance is? So I can see 2 hands. That doesn't seem quite right to me. Oh yeah, many hands. So 3 hands from the same person. That's pretty impressive. So I think, so what I would say is come and see us. We're starting to think a little bit about this. The message was loud and clear last week, and I met with, Arnab and Saud and I met with some customers here yesterday, and the message is quite loud and clear to us, is that you absolutely get it, and the value prop of having the management and the, that richness and the kind of best in class of managing Macs from Jamf and conditional access, and you get it, and you get the value of that for your business. But what you're telling us is that there's a lot more things that you want to be using in your compliance evaluation. So you were talking about things like which apps are on the device and a whole host of other things. So I think we're here today and we're here tomorrow as well. So if you see us kicking around, and we'll have a little bit of time after this session as well, I think, come and find us and just give us some ideas about the kinds of things that are important to you from a compliance perspective, just to help us understand where you're thinking with that.
Cool. All right. So what does it mean to connect Intune and Jamf? So what you get is a Jamf managed and an Intune compliant device. And they're really not competitive. They are integrated solutions that work together to protect the devices in your fleet. And we know how much Jamf cares about both the admin experience and the end user experience. So we made sure that we had a seamless experience for both of those groups of users. And when you have a Jamf managed Intune compliant device, this makes for a great experience for use cases such as zero touch deployments, having extensive inventory information present within the Microsoft Endpoint Manager console, and you get the depth of security controls that you're already used to if you're already deployed Jamf within your organization. And for your end user perspective, things are not really much different. They are still getting the same self-service app that they're used to and the same set of end user controls. And the real additional piece here is that you can deploy the Microsoft Intune Company Portal app, which is the one that can then register the device within the EMS services and give us a record to store the information and evaluate device compliance in the Intune service.
And the big thing here is that the ability to just completely reuse and benefit from the Jamf investment that you've got, and then you're adding the Microsoft CA parts on top of that. So the customers that we engage with, and we do this, there's very little impact to the way they do things. So it's something that if you are already using Office 365 and you have EMS licenses already, you can probably switch this on fairly quickly. There's a little bit of a bump to the end user when they have to install the CP, but you push that down via Jamf, and all they have to do is connect it into to Azure AD. So it's not a huge thing for them to do. And from an IT perspective, the expensive parts of all of that investment around policy controls and how you've configured and how you operate your environment with Macs, there's very little change at all. There's some additional bits and pieces like you would expect when you are troubleshooting. So if you've got devices that perhaps show as non-compliant when you think they should be, how you deal with that. So there's a little bit of process that you need to bolt on to what you're doing today, but you're not changing anything that you do with how you provision your Macs, how they get into your management platform, and how they're configured. So the end user experience changes ever so slightly, but the vast majority of that investment that you've got and how you operate, how you retire devices, how you push out software, how you configure the various different devices in different groups in your business, that really doesn't change, so.
Great. So moving on, let's take a look at how all of this integration works under the covers. So imagine you have an end user who has picked Mac as their platform for a work device, and they come into work on the first day. And in the middle, you have the Jamf Cloud Services and the Microsoft EMS Cloud Services that includes Azure Active Directory and Intune. On the far right, we have the protected corporate apps, resources, data that we want to protect using conditional access. So the Mac user, as they are going through the out-of-box experience, will be enrolled into Jamf. So they go through the familiar user experience for the enrollment flow into Jamf Pro. And Jamf then is pushing down the company portal app on the device, which essentially is creating a device record in Intune. And this is not the same as managing the device. The device is managed by Jamf. All we are doing is creating a record in Intune so that we can track that device, track the device inventory information that Jamf sends for that device, and also evaluate device compliance and so on for that device. So the integration that we have done is not just on the end user experience and not just limited to the client. We have deeper integration within the Jamf service and the Azure Active Directory and Intune services, where Jamf is then able to communicate with our services to provide the rich device inventory information that Intune then uses to evaluate compliance based on the compliance policies that the admin has configured. So once the compliance report is generated and if the device is considered to be compliant, then the user very seamlessly gets access to the protected resources. However, if for any reason the device is not compliant, the access is blocked to those protected resources, and we have done the work to make sure that there is a very seamless, user-friendly remediation process that spans across the self-service portal as well as the Intune company portal to guide the user to how to remediate their device out of non-compliance. Now, another thing to note here is the Jamf services and the Intune services sync every 24 hours the device inventory information. However, if Jamf, as the MDM, using the MDM agent, detects that any of the information regarding device compliance has changed, it immediately reports that to Intune, and within a few minutes, we are able to enforce compliance on that device and, if necessary, restrict access to the corporate resources. So it's really beneficial and a very rich experience where, if all is well, the user doesn't even know that the conditional access exists. However, if all is not well, then the end user will be stopped and told why what they need to do in order to get right back on track for what they were trying to do on that device.
I think that's, it's important that conditional access should be almost seamless to the end user. We're not looking to irritate them any more than we do already as IT, right? We're looking to empower them and try and, just get them access to the stuff that they need. But the whole point and purpose of this is, the effort that you guys go to configure and control those end user devices. We want to make sure that that is the only place that the corporate data can be, and that the end user can't just go and stand up some random device somewhere else and access that corporate data, which ultimately has been the big problem with breaking down those boundaries, moving out the services that end users are using out from your corporate data centers into the cloud, gives us that risk of somebody using a home PC or basically any device that's on the internet can try and access Office 365 data or other data. I've got a phone call. How cool is that? I should take it, actually. So the theory being there that the way to think of this whole model is funneling the where your corporate data can be stored onto the devices that you spend so much effort trying to configure and manage. And that really is what this is trying to do. This whole process and conditional access, the Jamf integration with Intune and conditional access, it's making sure that we know our corporate data is where it's supposed to be.
So moving on to requirements. So what do you need to make this integration work? It's really boilerplate stuff that you can find in the Intune and Jamf documentation. So first of all, you would need the AAD Premium and Microsoft Intune licenses. And that is part of EMS and Microsoft 365, and a Jamf Pro user account that has conditional access privileges, which you can grant in the Jamf Pro console. And for hardware, we support laptops running macOS 10.12 and over. And in terms of software, you need Jamf Pro 10.9 or later, and the Intune Company Portal app for macOS with version 1.12 or later.
And I think in here, the golden rule here is if Office runs there, so if the current version of Office runs there, we'll probably run as well. And we're trying to keep all of those things together. The limitations on OS support are down to Xcode, so that I'm sure people in here are well aware of this, but the versions of Xcode that you build your applications with have got boundaries about which operating systems will and won't work with it. So, so that's where we are. All of those apps that we build are notarized and compliant with Catalina. But it does mean when you start to move your Xcode version forward that you lose some of the older macOS support. Does anyone have a problem with that? Has anyone got Macs that are much older than 10.12? Not a single hand. There must be somebody. One, yeah, someone's giving me support here. I mean, we know this exists. We know that there are cases out there where people haven't. But as a general rule, we find that Mac update quite quickly across the board. But we do run into this occasionally. So it's worth being aware of if you've got a large environment that there are some limitations on OS version.
All right, moving on to best practices. So here are some recommended best practices that we have come up with based on our experience so far and what seems to work well with customers and end users. So really the most important one is if you're using the Jamf Intune integration, make sure you deploy both a configuration policy or profile in Jamf Pro in addition to the compliance policy that you create and deploy in Intune. And the reason is that your device is still managed by Jamf. Jamf is the MDM agent on the device. So even though you have created a compliance policy and in Intune and we're enforcing conditional access, we cannot provide the rich experience or the familiar experience that your end user usually sees when you're enforcing, hey, change your password, or you need to create a 10-character password. So creating a configuration profile really helps with making sure that the end user is configured, even before maybe by the time we have calculated compliance, the user has already done those things that would have prevented them in conditional access. So it is a preemptive way to make sure that your user is not has as little friction as possible as they go through this experience. And make sure that you're allowing the EMS, the Intune, Azure Active Directory related URLs, ports in firewall. These are pretty well documented on the internet. And there are also some handy ways to check the connection between the Intune service and Jamf service within your tenant to make sure that before you go and deploy and test it on users, to make sure that the services are actually able to successfully talk to each other. Some other key points to note is once the information within Intune is synced through Jamf for the managed Mac devices, so make sure that if you're removing a device, it's actually removed in Jamf, and then it should be reflected accordingly in Intune. If you have, after the session, if you have tips on improving our best practices that we recommend, we are happy to hear. All right, so if you are familiar with Jamf Intune integration and everything we talked about today you've already heard it before, then I think the next section is more exciting for you. So here's some stuff that we are currently working on. So coming soon, actually, coming pretty much any day now, that is group targeting. So we have been listening to you. So far in the past, if you wanted to use the Intune Jamf integration, you had to choose between managing all your Macs in Intune or all your Macs in Jamf. And we know that's not how enterprises work. That's not how migrations work. So that was very inflexible. So we're happy to announce that soon you'll be able to use group targeting, which will allow you to really target this to pilot users or help with migrations where you slowly ramp up your migration to Jamf or Intune. And some other things that we are adding, again, goes towards having the unified admin experience in a single pane of glass, is adding the last device sync date and time with Jamf in Endpoint Manager, as well as the last inventory update date and time. All right, so that's everything we have. And in closing, I want to say that, that the best way to protect Jamf managed Macs within Intune is really with is with conditional access in Intune, and the valuable partnership that we have with Microsoft, between Microsoft and Jamf, is not only at the leadership level, but also, like, I work in engineering, and we have dedicated resources working on the Jamf features, and we have bi-weekly calls with the Jamf team here, where we really sync and work on triage the incoming customer issues. And as Neil pointed out before, like, this is really not a competitive relationship. We really try to collaborate and figure out what's the best way to solve a customer's issue. So yeah, if you have any issues that you're dealing with right now, please come to us, talk to us. We will take that feedback to the team and hopefully have a resolution for you.
Yeah. And if you're not using it already and you've got Office 365, go and check it out, because there's a big benefit here to your business. You will probably find out if you've got Office 365, you probably already have the licenses to do this already. And it's not a very difficult thing to set up and configure. And the benefits of doing this are pretty big. Your data security team, IT security team, it's a good way to get some brownie points from them when you want them to do something else. So come and talk to us after this. We'd love to talk to you about what you're doing with Jamf and Office 365 and conditional access. If you've got any things that you would like us to be aware of, or things that you need to do that you can't do today, we'd love to chat to you about that. So we'll be here for the next 10 minutes.
Yes.
Here somewhere. But yeah, thank you for listening to us, and thank you very much.